I still remember the exact texture of that morning. It was a Tuesday in late October. The kind of morning where the light comes in flat and gray through the kitchen window, and everything feels slightly too quiet. Ava had just turned 3 the week before. There were still a few deflated balloons tied to the dining chair behind me. Pink and gold, her colors. The birthday cake box was still on the counter. And next to it, partially hidden under a stack of unopened mail, was a white envelope I didn't recognize. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Marcus. But the return label stopped me cold. 3 letters I recognized immediately from my work in medical billing. GTL Biolabs. Genomic Testing Laboratory. Houston, Texas. I stood there for 11 seconds. Counted them. I do that when my body knows something my mind isn't ready to accept yet. I didn't open it. I put it back exactly where I found it, slid the mail back on top, and I poured my coffee. I got Ava her oatmeal. I wiped her face when she smeared blueberry across her chin. I kissed her forehead. I took her to daycare. And the entire drive there I was completely silent because I already knew. In the specific cellular way that women who have been quietly doubted for years always know. Exactly what that envelope was. My husband had swabbed our daughter's mouth without telling me. He had sent her DNA to a laboratory. He was waiting for results that he believed were going to prove that I had betrayed him. What he didn't know was that those results were going to change everything, just not the way he planned. That envelope didn't expose me. It exposed a secret that had been buried for nearly 40 years. A secret that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with the woman who raised him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you who I am first, and why this moment, as devastating as it was also somehow the most clarifying of my entire marriage. My name is Renee. I'm 34 years old. And for the last 6 years, I have been the kind of wife that certain men take for granted specifically because she makes everything look effortless. I work as a medical billing auditor for a regional hospital network in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. My job, and I want you to understand this because it matters later, is to read documents that most people find impenetrable, and find the exact line where the numbers don't match the story. I do this 8 hours a day. I am very, very good at it. I catch errors that cost hospitals tens of thousands of dollars. I catch errors that protect patients from being billed for procedures that never happened. I am paid to notice discrepancies. I am paid to document what I find and act on it carefully. I say this not to brag. I say this because my husband spent 6 years treating me like someone who could be deceived, and he never once stopped to consider what I do for a living. Marcus and I met in 2017 at a mutual friend's engagement party in Plano. He was charming, funny, attentive in that way that feels like being held, like someone is actually watching you in a room full of people. We dated for 14 months. We got engaged. We married in April 2019 in a small outdoor ceremony with 43 guests, including his parents, his younger brother Dion, his Aunt Patricia, and his grandmother, who everybody called Miss B, and who held my hand during the vows and told me afterward that I was exactly what this family needed. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. For the first 2 years the marriage was good. Not perfect, no marriages, but warm, functional, real. We bought a house in Garland in 2020, a 3-bedroom with a backyard that needed work. I planted tomatoes the first summer. Marcus built a raised garden bed from scratch. Ava was born in October 2021, and I remember thinking, this is it. This is the life. But something in Marcus shifted around the time Ava was about 8 months old. I couldn't name it at first. It was too subtle, too easy to explain away. He became quieter, more watchful. He started asking questions, not the curious kind, the auditing kind. Where were you? Who did you have lunch with? Why did you come home 20 minutes later than usual? Questions delivered in a casual tone that didn't match the sharpness in his eyes. I told myself it was new parent anxiety, stress from work, the adjustment of having a baby. I told myself a lot of things in that marriage that I no longer believe. What I know now is that Marcus had decided, quietly, privately, without ever saying it directly to my face, that Ava might not be his. I don't know exactly when that thought took root. I don't know who planted it. But it grew. And for over 2 years, he watered it in silence while I stood in our kitchen making breakfast and genuinely believed we were okay. That October morning with that white envelope on the counter was the moment I realized we had never been okay. It was the moment I stopped performing for a marriage that had already put me on trial. Here is what gaslighting looks like when it comes from an intelligent man. It doesn't come in the form of screaming. It doesn't come with broken dishes or dramatic confrontations that you can point to later and say, "There, that was the moment." Comes quietly. It comes dressed as concern. It comes in the form of questions that sound reasonable until you realize you've been answering them for 2 years straight and nothing you say ever seems to be enough. Marcus never once looked me in the eye and said, "I think you cheated on me." Not once in 6 years. What he did instead was construct a slow, suffocating architecture of doubt. And he built it so carefully that for a long time, I thought the ceiling caving in was just the house settling. Let me give you specifics because I think specifics matter. Vague accusations are easy to dismiss. Patterns are harder to ignore. The first time I noticed something was genuinely wrong was in June 2022. Ava was about 8 months old. I had gone back to work part-time, 2 days a week from the office, 3 days remote. On a Wednesday, I stayed 40 minutes late to finish a reconciliation report my supervisor needed before end of day. I texted Marcus at 4:47 p.m. I have the message still, and told him I'd be home by 6:30. I walked in at 6:24. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his phone face down, and he looked at me the way you look at someone you were expecting to catch doing something wrong and are mildly disappointed to find they aren't. He didn't say anything about it that night. But 3 days later, in a completely unrelated conversation about weekend plans, he said, casually like he was mentioning the weather, "You know, you can just tell me when you want time to yourself. You don't have to make up reasons to stay late at work." I had receipts on my work system showing exactly when I clocked out. I didn't show them to him. I wish I had started documenting then. I didn't. The second incident was in November 2022. Marcus went through my phone. I know this because I have a specific habit. I keep my most recent apps listed in a particular order, and when I picked up my phone that Saturday morning, the order had changed. Nothing dramatic. Just 2 apps swapped. But I noticed things. He didn't find anything because there was nothing to find. He never mentioned it. Neither did I. But I started keeping a notes file on my work laptop that same week. Not because I had anything to hide, but because I was beginning to understand that I was living with someone who needed proof of my innocence on a rolling basis, and I had a feeling that need was never going to be satisfied. The third incident is the one that still makes me press my tongue to the roof of my mouth when I think about it. It was March 2023. Ava was 16 months old. We were at a family dinner at Marcus's parents' house. His mother Cheryl, his father Roland, Dion, Aunt Patricia, Miss B. Full table. We were talking about Ava's eyes the way you do with babies, everyone analyzing who she looks like. She has my nose, my mouth, my exact hairline. She has Marcus's brow bone and his long fingers. And Roland, his father, laughed and said, "She's got the family forehead, that's for sure. Every Whitfield comes out with that forehead." And Marcus said nothing. He picked up his glass. He took a long sip. And without looking at anyone, without looking at me, without looking at his daughter who was sitting 2 feet away in a high chair, he said very quietly, "Yeah, we'll see." Everyone kept talking. I don't think anyone else registered it. I registered it. I felt it move through my chest like cold water. We'll see. Ava was 16 months old, sitting in a high chair with mashed sweet potato on her face, and her father was already reserving judgment on whether she belonged to him. That was the moment I understood the depth of what I was dealing with. Not a man going through a rough patch. Not a man with anxiety. A man who had made a private decision about my character and was waiting patiently for the world to confirm it. Kept that in my notes file too. I found the envelope on a Tuesday. Marcus came home that Friday. I want to be precise here. I had spent 3 days completely normal. Packed Ava's daycare bag, attended 2 virtual work meetings, made pasta on Wednesday night, the $11 box of Dosecki he liked, with a turkey sausage. I did not bring up the envelope. I did not Google the lab. I did not ask questions. I went about my life with the particular discipline of a woman who has learned that the moment you show your hand is the moment you lose control of the room. Marcus came home at 6:52 p.m. on Friday. He set his bag down. He loosened his tie. He poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon without offering me any, which in hindsight tells you everything about where his head was. And then he sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and he folded his hands and he said, "I need to talk to you about something I did. And I need you to stay calm." I looked at him. I said, "Okay." He said, "I sent in a DNA test. For Ava. I used one of those mail-in kits." I let the silence sit for 4 full seconds. Then I said, "When?" "6 weeks ago," he said. "I sent in a sample of mine and a cheek swab from her. She was asleep. She didn't even wake up." He said that last part like it was a kindness. Like the fact that our 3-year-old daughter had been swabbed in her sleep without my knowledge or consent was somehow gentler because she hadn't cried. I said, "And?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I could see something shifting in his expression. Something that wasn't quite what I expected. He wasn't smug. He wasn't triumphant. He looked, and this is the only word that fits, confused. He said, "The results came back. It is mine. The paternity is confirmed." I nodded slowly. I said, "I know." He said, "Renee, I said, "Marcus. I found the envelope 3 days ago. I've been waiting for you to tell me yourself." His jaw tightened. He said, "I'm sorry. I know this was." And here is where I made the only impulsive decision of this entire story. I held up my hand. Not dramatically. It was up. And I said very quietly, "Before you explain yourself to me, I need you to tell me something. Did you read the full report? All of it?" He frowned. "I read the paternity section. Confirmed she was mine. That's what I was looking for." I said, "Go get the report." He looked at me strangely. He went to his home office. He came back with a printed document, 3 pages folded in thirds. He set it on the table between us. I didn't touch it. I said, "Turn to page 2, the familial relationship index section. Read the second finding out loud." And I watched my husband's face as he read. I watched the color change in his neck first. That specific flush that starts just above the collar. Then his hands. His hands went very still on the paper, the way hands go still when the brain has just received information it doesn't know how to process. He read it twice. I know because his eyes moved across the same lines 2 times before he looked up at me. He didn't say anything. I said, "Do you want me to explain what that means, or do you already know?" He already knew. The DNA test he had secretly ordered to prove that I had been unfaithful had confirmed, with a 99.97% probability, that he was Ava's father. It had also flagged, automatically, algorithmically, without anyone asking, that the paternal grandparent DNA profile on file did not match. Meaning, the man Marcus had called Dad his entire life, the man who had laughed about the Whitfield family forehead at that dinner table, was not his biological father. Marcus had not been testing my loyalty. He had accidentally uncovered his mother's secret. A secret she had kept for 37 years. There is a specific kind of silence that fills a room when a person realizes the ground beneath them is not what they thought it was. Marcus sat at that kitchen table for a long time. The bourbon glass was still in front of him, untouched now. The report was open between us. And he just sat there, blinking slowly. The way people blink when their brain is working too hard to bother sending signals to the rest of the body. I let him sit. I didn't comfort him. I didn't pile on either. I just waited. Because here is what that page 2 actually said, in the clean, clinical language of a genomic laboratory. Secondary familial analysis indicates a low probability of a first-degree paternal biological relationship between the tested male subject and the registered paternal grandparent profile. Confidence interval, 98.6%. Recommendation, further testing advised. In plain language, Roland Whitfield, the man who had sat at that dinner table and laughed about the family forehead, was almost certainly not Marcus's biological father. Cheryl, his mother, had been carrying this secret since before Marcus was born. I want to be careful here because this is where the story gets layered. I felt no satisfaction in that moment. Not yet. What I felt was something closer to stunned clarity, the kind that comes when you've been living inside a distorted picture for so long that seeing it straighten out is almost disorienting. This man had spent 2+ years quietly suspecting me. He had swabbed our sleeping daughter. He had ordered a lab test behind my back. He had sat across from me at dinner tables and at family gatherings carrying a private verdict about my character, and the instrument he chose to confirm that verdict had instead cracked open a fault line in his own foundation. I hadn't done anything wrong. I had never done anything wrong. And now he knew it. Definitively. With a 99.97% confidence interval. But more than that, now he had a question he couldn't answer alone. A question that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with a woman who had been the moral authority in his family his entire life. A woman who had, on more than one occasion, looked at me with a particular kind of watchful scrutiny, as if she was always slightly concerned about what I might figure out. Maybe she had reason to be. I picked up the report. I folded it back into thirds. I set it on his side of the table. And I said, "I think you have a phone call to make. And it's not to me." He looked up. His eyes were red at the edges now. He said, "Renee, I'm so sorry." I didn't. I said, "I know. But that's a conversation for another night. Tonight, you need to figure out what you're going to do with what you just found out." Got up. Checked on Ava. She was asleep, one arm around her stuffed elephant, completely unbothered by the fact that her father's entire understanding of his own identity had just quietly collapsed 2 rooms away. I stood in her doorway for a moment and breathed. That was the turning point. Not because I had done anything, but because the truth had done it for me. What happened next is where I want to be very deliberate because I think this is the part people misunderstand about situations like mine. Revenge, real, lasting, structural revenge, does not look like a confrontation. Doesn't look like a speech. It doesn't look like screaming across a kitchen or exposing someone at a family dinner. It looks like paperwork. Looks like patience. It looks like a woman who audits medical billing records for a living quietly applying those exact same skills to her own life. I did not blow up my marriage that weekend. I did not call Cheryl. I did not tell Dion or Aunt Patricia or Roland. I did not post anything, say anything or perform anything. What I did was open a new folder on my encrypted work drive and title it simply Documentation. Inside that folder, over the following 3 weeks, I placed the following items. A photograph of the GTL Biolabs envelope, time-stamped from the morning I found it, October 19th. A full scan of the 3-page DNA report. Screenshots of Marcus's text messages from the prior 8 months, which I had quietly backed up to a secondary cloud account after the phone incident in November 2022. Messages that included, on 2 separate occasions, him texting his brother Dion lines like, "Still waiting on something, will explain later," and "If it comes back how I think, everything changes." Those messages told me 2 things. Marcus had been planning this for months, and at least one other person in that family had known. I also contacted a family law attorney. Not to file anything. Not yet. Just to understand my position. I paid $200 for a 1-hour consultation with a woman named Andrea, who had 15 years of family law experience and the kind of quiet, precise energy I immediately trusted. She told me several things I already suspected and a few I didn't. She told me that in the state of Texas, conducting a DNA test on a minor child without the consent of the custodial parent occupies a legal gray area. Not automatically criminal, but potentially relevant in a custody proceeding as evidence of bad faith. She told me that any documentation of a pattern of surveillance, control, or emotional manipulation within the marriage would be relevant if we proceeded to divorce. She told me to keep everything. Every text, every email, every voicemail, every dated note I had made in that file going back to 2022. I had all of it. Meanwhile, Marcus was unraveling in the particular way that men unravel when the story they've told themselves stops holding together. He called Cheryl the Sunday after I showed him page 2. I was not in the room. But our house in Garland is not large, 1,840 square feet, and the walls between the kitchen and the home office are not thick. I heard enough. I heard his voice go from careful to cracked within about 4 minutes. I heard the words the report said, and Roland doesn't know, and then a long stretch of silence where I imagined Cheryl was talking. Then I heard Marcus say very quietly, "How long?" And then nothing for a while after that. He didn't come out of that office for 2 hours. I made Ava dinner. Chicken nuggets, the dinosaur-shaped ones she liked, with a side of apple slices. I gave her a bath. I read her 2 books. I put her to bed. I did every ordinary thing a mother does on a Sunday evening, while 15 feet away my husband sat alone with the weight of a secret his mother had just confirmed to him over the phone. I want to be honest with you. I did feel something in those weeks. Not triumph. Not yet. Something more complicated. Grief, maybe, for the marriage I thought I had. For the trust that had been spent so carelessly. For the version of Marcus I had married in 2019, standing in that outdoor ceremony with 43 people watching, who had seemed so certain about who I was. But underneath the grief, something else was growing. Something steady and clean. Clarity. I knew exactly where I stood. I knew exactly what I had. And I knew, with the same quiet certainty I bring to every audit, that when the moment came to make my move, I would be ready. Here is how it ended. Not with a scene. Not with a dinner table confrontation. Not with anyone crying in a parking lot. It ended the way most real things end. Slowly, then all at once, and with a surprising amount of paperwork. 6 weeks after the DNA report, Marcus and I sat down together. No lawyers, just the 2 of us, and I laid out what I had. Not aggressively. Only. The documentation folder. The attorney consultation notes. The text messages between him and Dion. The timeline I had reconstructed going back 18 months. I didn't present it as a weapon. I presented it the way I present audit findings at work. Here is what the record shows. He didn't argue with any of it. He couldn't. The record was accurate. We agreed to begin separation proceedings in January. The divorce was filed in February, uncontested. Andrea handled it cleanly. The house in Garland was appraised at $340,000. My share of the equity came to $87,500 after the mortgage payoff. Ava's custody arrangement was set at primary residence with me, with Marcus having Ava every other weekend and 1 weekday evening per week. His request, which I agreed to, because despite everything Marcus loves his daughter and she loves him, and that was never the part one wanted to damage. The financial settlement also included 30 months of spousal support, which Andrea had argued for on the basis of my reduced work hours during Ava's first 2 years. Hours I had cut back specifically to support Marcus's career transition in 2022 when he changed companies. I won't pretend the divorce was painless. It wasn't. There were nights in February and March that were very hard. But they were honest nights. And honest hard is better than comfortable dishonest. I know that now. As for Cheryl and Roland, that is not my story to tell in full. What I know is this: Roland found out. Not from me. I have no idea exactly how it came out, whether Marcus told him directly, whether Cheryl finally said it herself, whether Roland noticed something in his son's behavior and pressed until the wall came down. What I know is that by March, Roland had moved out of the house he and Cheryl had shared for 39 years. I know this because Dion, of all people, sent me a text message that simply said, "I'm sorry for what my brother put you through. You didn't deserve it." That message told me everything I needed to know about the state of that family. Marcus, to his credit, has never asked me to keep quiet about what happened. He's never asked me to protect his mother's reputation or manage anyone's feelings about the situation. I think he understands, at some level, that he lost the right to ask me for favors the morning he swabbed our daughter's cheek while she was sleeping. What I think about most now is not the betrayal. It's not the DNA report. It's not even the look on Marcus's face when he read page 2. What I think about most is Ava, 3 years old, completely unaware, sitting in her high chair with sweet potato on her face while the adults around her were quietly dismantling everything. She didn't need to be tested. She was never in question. She was just a little girl, with my nose, my mouth, my hairline, and her father's brow bone and his long fingers. Whole and complete and entirely herself, regardless of what any piece of paper said. I think about that a lot. There is something quietly devastating about a man who goes looking for evidence of his wife's dishonesty and finds, instead, the deepest dishonesty of his own life, sitting in his own DNA, in the body of the woman who raised him. He didn't find a liar in me. He found one in his own mirror. I didn't put that there. I didn't cause that. I didn't orchestrate it. The truth did what truth eventually always does. It simply refused to stay folded. I live in a smaller apartment now, in Irving. It has a good kitchen and a window in Ava's room that gets morning light. I planted herbs on the windowsill last month. Basil, mint, a small rosemary. Simple things. Real things. Things that grow when you pay attention to them. I'm 34 years old, and for the first time in 6 years, I am not being quietly audited by someone who was supposed to trust me. That feeling, that specific, clean, unremarkable feeling of simply being believed, turns out to be the only thing I ever actually wanted. If you have ever been the one in your family who was doubted, investigated, suspected, or quietly put on trial for crimes you never committed, I want you to know something. The truth is not on your side because you fought for it. It's on your side because it's the truth. And truth, given enough time and a little paperwork, tends to find its own way home. If this story hit different, you already know why. Drop a comment and tell me. Have you ever been suspected by someone who turned out to be the guilty one? I read every single one. And if you've been carrying a story like this, quietly, alone, waiting for someone to finally believe you, share this video. Someone in your circle needs to hear it today. Subscribe if you're new. New stories drop every week. And remember, the truth doesn't need your help to survive. Just needs time.